Enoch walked with God for 365 years.
Then he was no more, for God took him.
Shalom, this is Hakam Yar ben-Emmett again with another exciting lecture on my YouTube channel for the Torah Watchman Show International 510c3 Company. Hope everyone's been well. The title of this video, the Book of Enoch. You will not find the Book of Enoch anywhere in the Tanakh, the Torah, the Jewish Bible, or even the New Testament Bible. You might find it in a Roman Catholic Bible, and I'm talking about the Apocryphals, and a few other exceptional sources out there, and we'll get to that in a moment. But it is an ancient Jewish apocalyptic work, and I did not know how ancient it was until I did some deep diving for you, going through dozens of different books and research articles about this. It serves as a library of 5 distinct texts composed by multiple anomalous authors between the 4th century before the Common Era, more than 2,000 years ago, and the 1st century CE, okay, during the time of Jesus, essentially, in Judea. While traditionally attributed to the biblical patriarch Enoch, Pseudepigrapha, in other words, is a false writing. Writings where an author uses a revered figure's name to lend authority to their own message. So you could say it's not quite an apocryphal as far as a false writing, but the intent cannot be confirmed absolutely because it's an exaggeration. And so, in other words, whoever wrote the books or the annals of Enoch, they reverse engineered the patriarch Enoch. Now, in dealing with a fictional or literary character, like what was described in the books of Enoch, first understand that the character Enoch was a real individual, first described in the book of Bereshit or Genesis, and mentioned again in 1 Chronicles for the pedigree of Adam. What became mystical in the context of this character is the lack of notation for Enoch's death. It is very, very unusual because in the pedigree leading up from Adam all the way to Abraham and so on, very clearly it explained where all these men of great renown, how long they lived and when they died. But with the single exception of Enoch, it's very strange. I'll get into that in a moment. So what became mystical about this is that he literally walked with God for 365 years. Interesting, there's about 365 days in a year, but this individual lived a long time, going toward 4 centuries, and people during the time of Noah and before lived a long time. And then he was no longer on the earth or available to his family. So he was here one day and he was gone the next. Christians use the word rapture. Became ascended being. God took him away from the earth. Maybe God caused him to die and have it hit his body. We don't know. And it's not germane to speculate any further, because if it was that critically important for us to know in this generation, there would be more icing on the cake, folks. There would be more detail. However, with the books of Enoch, there's a lot of icing on the cake for that. And we'll get into that in a moment. Okay, in Genesis chapter 5, verses 18 to 24, this provides Enoch's genealogy as the 7th progenitor after Adam. It notes that he lived 365 years, fathered Methuselah, okay, and walked with God, then he was no more, for God took him. Unlike others in the genealogy, the text does not say he died specifically. That may be an implication, but it does not say it black and white. 1 Chronicles chapter 1 verse 3, Enoch is mentioned simply as a name in the official genealogical list of the descendants of Adam, and I believe it's also mentioned to refer to the land of Enoch. Okay, what is fascinating about this prolific and intriguing character Enoch is what he became through artistic license much later in time within the heart of ancient Persia. So we're talking about ancient Persia and all the mysticism of that. And as you know, the ancient religion of that country, back in the time of Jewish exile, we're talking about Nehemiah, Ezra, and other Jews there. You know the story about Queen Esther. Well, Zoroastrianism is the name of the religion that was in practice then, or dualism, and it was very mystical. Good God, bad God, demons, evil spirits, and things of that nature. So that was the context in the heart of Persia. That's where these books arose in their very beginnings. The basis of this video lecture is providing evidence of how the literary works of Enoch were used in parallel to develop the imagery behind Jesus by others described in the New Testament, and notably the Jewish oral tradition for all things mystical as codified in the Zohar, or is known as the Kabbalah. You heard me. The vivid imagery of the ascended Jesus that you read throughout, especially in the Gospel of John and later on in the Book of Revelations. When I go through this lecture, if you're a Christian watching this, I hope you are, I want you to pay attention to the parallels for this much older work than Apostle Paul's writings, you know, his letters, or the four Gospels, or any other book that Christians have grown to revere and to love within their King James Bible. Now, composition and structure. The book was composed in stages during the Second Temple period, likely originally in Aramaic or Hebrew, consists of 5 primary sections. I will break this out. The Book of the Watchers, very interesting. In chapter 1 through 36, the oldest section, likely dating to the 3rd and 4th century before the Common Era. So before the life of Jesus, the milestone. It expands on Genesis chapter 6, so it gives it artistic license, a data filler, and it fills in an apparent gap in the information that explains what happened to Enoch when God took him and he was no longer on the earth. We're dealing how fallen angels, watchers, descended to the earth and mated with humans and produced the Nephilim. Now, I have videos about this. Orthodox rabbis say it's scandalous to say such things. Other rabbis are kind of neutral on this subject and have an open mind. In Judaism, we don't believe that angels are fallen or sinful beings because they don't have souls. They don't have freedom of choice. Moloch, it means messenger. But in the author of the books of Enoch, well, he used artistic license and went a little bit further in the metaphysical and supernatural realm. The Book of Parables is found. The information here is chapters 37 through 71, also known as the similitudes. This is the most controversial section. Why? It introduces a messianic and quote-unquote Son of Man. You hear me? Son of Man, that you hear so predominantly in the New Testament and quoted by Christian theologians in my Bible, in the Jewish Bible, anywhere it says Son of Man. Like Ezekiel was referred to by God as the Son of Man. Okay? Who judges the world. So there is an epic individual that is referred to in this section of the Book of the Parables. He judges the world through righteousness. It is notably absent from the Dead Sea Scrolls, however, leading some scholars to believe it was composed later. perhaps in the 1st century Common Era. And I have to understand there is scientific empirical evidence here on the carbon dating of the papyrus. You know, it was a plant-based paper product that was used to write down information, scripture, stories, and in this context, the Book of Enoch. These are actually scrolls, parchments, and things like this, and some of them were found in the Qumran cave in very dry areas that are isolated from moisture and from thieves and from contamination, so they preserved the content for a very, very long time. And a lot of these things were just recently discovered, leading up to the formation of Israel again in 1948. Now, some scholars believe again that it was written in the 1st century. So if this is true, it was written in the same time frame that the New Testament was composed. So if you have the Apostle Paul's 13 letters, his epistles per se, he compiled these by 50 Common Era, the year 50, leading up to the 1st century. Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John were written after Paul, and they were written by anonymous authors, all in Koine Greek, incidentally, and they were written from 80 to 90 to up to the 1st century, or maybe after the 1st century. So there is a coincidence here in which the parable section, that section of Enoch, the newer section of the Annals of Enoch, compared to the earliest books, which I started in the beginning of this lecture, that were written in Persia before the Common Era, before the life of Jesus, before his disciples. So this section could have been the alpha source or predecessor for the 4 synoptic gospels. Why am I saying that? Now, this is a supposition that I said. I'm making an hypothesis. What I'm saying is, the books, the 4 gospels, the book of Revelation, the more metaphysical things like the Gospel of John, when it has the description of Jesus as a supernal, a supernatural being, well, there was a thought and insight there, and ideas and cognition that may have come from other ideas many years before that. So there was also an astronomical book. It talks about the 364 solar calendar, like the Hebrew calendar, which started in the time of Babylon. Now, the book of Dream Visions, this is chapter 83 through 90, contains animal apocalypse. What am I talking about? Well, read the prophet Daniel. He uses beasts and animals to refer to the various kingdoms of the earth that will rise and fall over a period of time as a futuristic prophecy of apocalypse. So it's very interesting. Whoever wrote the book of dreams probably first read the books of Daniel. It's a chance, right? The Epistle of Enoch, chapters 91 to 108, includes the apocalypse of weeks, which divides history into 10 weeks of judgment and renewal. Folks, definitely this sounds just like the prophet Daniel. These are newer books that were written after Daniel lived, and of course Daniel wrote down his prophecy and his works right around 500 before Common Era, or 2,500 years ago, more or less. Maybe 2,600 years ago. As you know, Daniel was carried off into Babylon with the prophet Ezekiel when Judea fell. Now, historical preservation and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Before the 20th century, critics often dismissed the Book of Enoch as a medieval fake. Absolutely. because it survived only in its complete form in the Ge'ez, or known as the Ethiopic language. Now, Ethiopia had a very ancient tongue, similar to Aramaic, but not that, but it's almost like a cryptic language, that a very old language, that some of these writings that were Christianized are found in the monasteries and things of that nature. So, however, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls at the Qumran in 1947 fundamental changes here. So instead of an isolated group of esoterics or in a monastery, people making up things, just a one-off kind of thing, a fragment, this is a much larger data source that extends beyond before Jesus, the life of Jesus, before the Common Era. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were dated much earlier than the fragment was found that was written in the Ethiopic language. Now, physical proof, and that's what we're after, right? Archaeologists found fragments of 11 different Aramaic manuscripts of Enoch, some dating back to 200 before Common Era. And it's pretty interesting, right? Remember, Aramaic is the sister language of Hebrew, and its consonants resemble quite a bit like modern Hebrew does today. And if you know Hebrew, you probably can read Aramaic, similar to English and maybe Anglo-Saxon English, a different dialect, but basically the same character set without the Masoret text. Widespread popularity, folks, the Annals of Enoch were extremely popular in his day. Very cerebral, like Kabbalah, and a lot of people thought it was imaginative, and people wanted to explore the supernatural, superstitious things, understand the epic battles between good and evil, to explain why the world around them behaved in the way it did, why there was a great earthquake, why was there a plague, to explain the total eclipse of the sun, famine, other things like this. They wanted to understand if there were spiritual principalities that were governing all of these, all the muck, all the chaos, on the earth among us human beings. Humans have always tried to explain in nature why things happen, right? Now, this volume of copies suggests it was one of the most respected and widely read books in Judea during the time of Christ. So, during the time that Jesus lived and had his Sermon on the Mount and had his appearance in Jerusalem and all of this during that time, at the same time, these books of Enoch were being read. So this is contextually relevant here. When you hear Jesus saying one thing, but you read something that had the same kind of metaphysical context, you gravitate toward it, right? It's more believable. So if Jesus was supposedly doing miracles, well, that's supernatural and metaphysical, right? So if you were reading this book, and this implies that people were literate during that time, and not many people were literate at all. So let me quantify what I said. If people were reading the books of Enoch, then these people were learned, and these people were in academia, and reading in halls of knowledge and things like that. So it was probably limited, but anyone that was providing political governance in that time, even Greek philosophers like Aristotle, were probably reading this information too. So with that being said, so would it be logical to conclude that the New Testament writers benefited from this material during this time? It's always believed that there is an alpha source for Mark, for instance. maybe original source is written in Aramaic, but it was lost. So all we have is Koine Greek. And of course, when you write something down over and over again by different people, it may be altered in some way. So if you have an original alpha source per se, and then you lost track of that, or you go by someone who read it and not you in another province, they write down cliff notes for you, and then you copy those notes down, then you compose your own literary work. Well, it may not be quite the same as the original source. That's what I'm talking about. The Apostle Paul completed his letters by 50 CE, and the Book of Revelation, like I said earlier, was completed at least by the turn of the 1st century, 100 CE. Textual accuracy. The Aramaic fragments largely confirm that the Ethiopic version preserved by the church was a faithful translation of much older original. And again, when something is extremely popular and culturally relevant and it's passed down from generation to generation, it probably has a master source before that, okay? Now, why did these books of Enoch disappear, say, after the turn of the 1st century? Why did they lose importance? Well, there's several reasons for this. First of all, supposedly it was a Jewish work, and all things Jewish were not very popular going up to the 3rd century in the time of Constantine, right? But you have oral tradition, and you have the pretty much tradition of the New Testament churches that Paul had set up during his time. Despite its early popularity, the Book of Enoch was eventually excluded from the canons of both Judaism and most Christian denominations. It was considered on its face as a heresy because it was not in the black and white liturgy or of the theology that was accepted and adopted, or did this for by the Roman Empire, by individuals like Constantine and others, the founding fathers of like today's church back in that time, 4th and 5th and 6th century, going up to the Middle Ages. But it may have been left out of the Christian Bible. However, there was a thread of intent that was interwoven throughout the New Testament. Anytime you talked about Jesus, always supernatural acts, the way Jesus was portrayed, like for instance his ascension with Moses and Abraham on the other side. It was larger than man, more than human, and this kind of thing. And you hear the phrase over and over again, Son of Man, Son of Man, Son of Man. Folks, this phrase is throughout the annals or books of Enoch. It was used predominantly in the Jewish Bible too to refer to prophets that were called by God. So literally, every son of Adam is a son of man. It's not some son of an ape or son of an elephant. Of course, there's going to be a son of man, but it doesn't necessarily have to be messianic per se. But interestingly, the phrase was mentioned throughout the books of Enoch, especially the section of the parables. Now, Christian exclusion. By the 4th century, the broader church deemed it as heretical and apocryphal, favoring the closed canon that excluded pseudepigraphical works instead. Why? Because I did a video about this recently. Constantine literally called, I think, 133 bishops together in Nicaea, and they actually voted on the final accepted theology for the church during that time, for the Trinity and other things like that. They voted on it, and they locked out any other ideas, and they relegated any other ideas other than the Trinity or their variant of the Trinity as heresy. And they punished people. There's very strict prohibitions attached to that. if you went outside of scope of what was considered Constantine's version of the Trinity. Just as one example. Not all Christian sects accept non-canonical works, but much of the content is interwoven throughout their Bible. Ethiopian preservation, only the Ethiopian Orthodox, something known as the Tawahido Church, maintained it fully inspired scripture, believing it was authentic record for a future generation given by God to one of his prophets, namely Enoch. Okay? Now, while the Book of Enoch was mostly rejected by mainstream rabbinical Judaism, its themes and folklore survived underground and became a foundational pillar for Jewish mysticism. Hence their tree of knowledge, directly influencing the development of oral tradition and eventually the Zohar. Here, it is extremely important to note the strong correlation between the portrayal of Jesus and his supernatural characteristics in the New Testament, like the Gospel of John, and most notably in the Book of Revelation, with mainstream Jewish rabbinical thought throughout the oral Torah. You have yin and yang. You have two parallel thoughts here on how the books of Enoch, that conceptualization of all that vastly metaphysical and supernatural, and scandalous, heretical, whatever, these kind of notions of the Godhead and things of this nature, how it went in two tangents, in the behind the scenes interwoven in the New Testament, like in the Book of Revelation, who borrowed from the books of Enoch, like the visions of animals. Well, Satan is referred to the beast, I think in chapter 13 of the Book of Revelation, rising upon the sea of politics and man, that kind of thing, referring to Satan as a dragon. You have the animal semaphore or metaphysical similarities and comparisons, that kind of thing. You have that kind of artistic license and that visual imagery that made Revelation such a popular book of eschatology. So you see the correlation here. We have Kabbalah, which is part of Judaism's oral tradition. And you have the New Testament and all its variants of the New Testament. And most Christian theological ideas about how Jesus is found throughout their Old Testament as a son of man kind of figure, or even an angelic being. Okay? Consider, though, throughout all these points I'm trying to make, the egg before the chicken here. Not the chicken before the egg. Now a brief introduction into the Kabbalah tree of knowledge in respect to the books of Enoch. The transformation of Enoch into an angel by the name of Metatron. Has anyone ever heard that word before? Well, I have the 23 volumes of Zohar in my Judaica in my Jewish library and my formal dining room. And it has this angel mentioned predominantly. Now, this angel is actually invented by whoever wrote the books of Enoch. We don't know who wrote it. We just know that it spanned from 200 BCE all the way to the 1st century CE during the time of Jesus. So we just know that this angel Metatron was conceptualized during that time frame. So there was a transformation of the human and the man Enoch into this angelic supernatural being, Metatron. The Zohar connection, well, the Zohar refers to Metatron as a prince of the countenance, a lesser Yahweh, a lesser God. You heard me, okay? This concept of human becoming a supreme angelic being, the highest mediator between God and man, is a direct legacy of the Book of Enoch. It's also the premise behind Jesus in the New Testament. Now, you can go to Amazon and you can order the Apocryphal. The books of Enoch are included within that. Like I said, a Roman Catholic Bible, I believe, has all the Apocryphals there. And it's readily available. So if you don't believe what I'm saying, am I saying you're making accusations, Yar? No. I'm just telling you the information I've researched. These are not my own words. I'm reading a report of my analysis and research I did to build this video lecture. Now, the origin of evil and the other side, known as Sitra Achra. The Book of Enoch explains evil through the rebellion of the Watchers or fallen angels. Okay? Mainstream Judaism focuses on the Yetzer Hara, human evil, inclination. In other words, we have the inclination to do evil, but we're not born evil. Like versus Christian belief that we're all born sinful and intent to do evil. That's why you need the blood-bought sacrifice of Jesus to be saved from hell and damnation. The Zohar, while it keeps Yetzer Hara in check, develops a more complex demonology of external forces that's continually challenging our virtue and seducing us. You hear about the 7 deadly sins, the Zohar's description of the Nephilim, and the husk, Kilapot, the trap, divine light mirror, the Enochian idea that spiritual pollution was brought to earth by rebellious celestial beings. Now, I know that sounds kind of odd, but the battle between good and evil, say fallen angels and righteous angels that were loyal to God, and this is dualism, folks, and this is exactly what Christians believe. They believe there was a war in heaven. They would believe in Revelation, talking about a third of all the angelic kingdom was cast out because they followed Lucifer. And, and Lucifer is upon the earth. He's a power. He's a godlike being among man and the earth. And we're under his control because we're carnal beings. Well, all of this originated from the books of Enoch before it was conceptualized in the New Testament by whoever wrote the 4 Gospels. So, the Masa Merkabah, or the work of the chariot, the Book of Enoch contains some of the earliest description of the divine throne room and God's chariot. We can read the first chapter of the prophet Ezekiel about the river of Kabbalah. He had a night vision, and he saw the eternal chariot of God, and all the wheels with the eyes and everything all around it, and the lightning and everything else. Something so metaphysical, almost scandalous, that the book of Ezekiel, because of that imagery of God, which we're forbidden to even conceptualize, and people cannot understand it, Ezekiel was almost not included in the canonized Jewish Bible, believe it or not. For the same reason, these kind of things cause people to pause when they read it in Enoch. These descriptions became the basis of the Merkabah mysticism, a secret oral tradition that thrived between 100 BCE and 1000 CE, going up to the Middle Ages. This imagery more than likely originated from the prophet Ezekiel's visions of the throne of God. Just return to your Old Testament, turn to the book of Ezekiel, look at chapter 1, read that representation given to Ezekiel in his night vision of the imagery of God. Compare what you read in the books of Enoch, and compare, if you're Christian or Noahide or whatever, and you might have a New Testament Bible in the house somewhere, you can read this too. It is amazing the similarities here on how Jesus personified compared to Enoch's transformation to Metatron. And we're going to talk about that. The practitioners of this tradition were the spiritual ancestors of the Kabbalah who wrote the Zohar. They used the tours of heaven found in Enoch as a map for their own meditative journeys to the throne of God. I did not know this, folks, and I've been on earth for 61 years, that Zohar was based at all upon the books of Enoch. I did not know that, but now I do, and I'm giving you information. I could have chosen to sit on this and explore it myself, or share it with you in video format. Because I love you, I want to get this information out. Secret calendars and cosmic cycles, okay? The Zohar and Enoch are both share the obsession with celestial secrets and the idea that time is divided into specific cosmic weeks or cycles. Everything physical has a spiritual counterpart, essentially, okay? The astronomical Book of Enoch provided a spiritual physics that's influenced how later mystics understood the relationship between the stars. I hear about astrology and things like that, the Hebrew letters and the creation of the world. Every Hebrew letter has a personality and has a frequency or an oscillation, resonance frequency or something, and a power, and energy attached to it. This is in Zohar. It sounds interesting, but none of that you find in the 5 books of the Torah. And if Moses thought it was very important to impart to his generation during his time, much less us, I think he would have included it, right? And we're forbidden to add or subtract from the Torah. The irony here, okay, is that mainstream Judaism rejected the Book of Enoch to stay pure. We want everything to be pure, right? But the spirit of Enoch became the backbone of Jewish mysticism, like an infectious disease of corruption. So when you read the Talmud, it is full of this stuff. It is full of incantation. It is full of mysticism. Rabbis in the past encountering demons. All of this, evil spirits in a ruin. I've read this. But a lot of this thread of information had its origins going back 200 BCE in the books of Enoch. The Son of Man rivalry, okay? The most direct parallel is the title of Son of Man. I already spoke about this before. In the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly refers to himself as the Son of Man. You will behold the Son of Man, that kind of thing. A figure from Daniel 7 who is given authority and dominion of the Ancient of Days, okay? In the Book of Enoch, first Enoch, in the section called the Similitudes of Enoch, the patriarch Enoch ascends to heaven and is stunned when God reveals to him, "You are the Son of Man who is born into righteousness." The parallel, both figures are human candidates identified as this pre-existent cosmic judge. Scholars like Daniel Boyarin suggest this represents a theological rivalry, okay, yin and yang, where early Christians claimed Jesus was his figure, while some Jewish mystics maintained it was solely Enoch. In other words, Enoch, the man, when God took him, and he was no more among his family, no more around his son Methuselah, well, he became this eternal being, Metatron, which is Christians identify with Jesus, incidentally.
He ascends to the heavens, transformed by the sacred fire.
So the lesser God, or the lesser Yahweh, the Son of God, here we go again. Both traditions struggle to explain a figure who are distinct from God, yet possess God's full authority. Metatron is given the title of the lesser God, Yahweh HaKatan. He sits on the throne identical to God and bears the divine name within him. The divine name, Exodus chapter 23, verse 21, my name is in him, okay? Jesus is described as the image of the invisible God in Colossians chapter 1, verse 15. And the one whom God has conferred the name above all other name in Philippians chapter 2, verses 9. You see the similarities here. It's not a huge stretch to see the common thread here, right? Now the parallel, both act as a visible manifestation of the invisible deity. They function as the vice-regent of heaven, total executive power over the cosmos. Note, all these writings were much older than the New Testament in the original thought and context. Okay? Can you please agree with me with this? Okay? What I'm saying here is that it may be a newsflash that what you read in the New Testament and you believe it was revealed to New Testament authors, like whoever wrote the four synoptic gospels, was revealed literally divinely by God to these people. And it's all divine in your mind. However, it was written at a certain point in time, and we could prove when it was written, more or less, okay? It was written after Jesus died, after the disciples died. I always said people did not live very long. They didn't even, they maybe died, they lived about 26, 27 years. 30 years was the top notch for people living. Half their children died. But I'm just saying the dates are known very well of the four Gospels and the 13 epistles of Paul and the book of Revelation and other 1st and 2nd Timothy, Philippians and Colossians, all of this, for the churches and everything that Paul wrote letters to, and Greece. So, with that being said, you know it was written at certain times in the New Testament and canonized. Well, you know Enoch, those writings, ones I'm quoting here, were written much earlier than any of the authors of the four Gospels. The physical metamorphosis. Enoch's transformation of Metatron mirrors descriptions of the glorified or transfigured Jesus. Consider the transfiguration moment of Jesus standing by Moses on one side and Abraham on the other. Enoch, Metatron, his body turns into torches of fire, his eyes to flashes of lightning, and expands to fill the universe. This description is epic description you will find also about Jesus. Jesus at the transfiguration in Matthew 17, chapter 17, his face shone like the sun, so he became more than human at that time, and his clothes became white as light. Revelation chapter 1, the glorified Jesus is described with eyes with blazing fire, like the sun shining in all of his glory. Again, that original thought from Metatron, aka Enoch, was in those books before it was ever conceptualized by the authors of the New Testament scripture. Now, and a voice of rushing waters, continuing on, imagery almost identical to the description of Metatron and the third chapter of Enoch, or the third book of Enoch, I'm sorry. Did the unknown authors of the New Testament copy and paste material from the books of Enoch to accomplish their ideas? It may have been an idea, and I tell my wife all the time, there's no such thing as original thought, right? We take great pride in every original thought we have, or an invention. We patent it, we make money off of these things. But I give glory to God. God has all the originality. I commit plagiarism, whatever, and I claim things to be my original thought. That's just the way I look at things. But as far as human-to-human interaction, and especially literary works in academia, there's always an original thought. That's a thread of, if you read books in a library, you cannot help to keep those ideas in your subconscious. When you write your own books, it's going to be part of that book, right? That narrative. Does that make sense? So in conclusion, what was decided within Judaism to counter these supposed heresies within the books of Enoch, and exploited by the New Testament authors to construct the imagery of Jesus. So you have some embarrassment here. Orthodoxy, Judaism, says the books of Enoch is clearly a heresy, outright, if you read the books apart from anything else. But if you read that content secondhand in the Zohar, in Kabbalah, or in the Talmud, those indirect references to that master alpha source, it's okay. And it's part of oral tradition, and it may even be part of oral law too, something they teach in yeshiva. So it's very interesting here. So the two powers controversy. The parallels were so strong that they became dangerous. What do I mean by that? Well, in the Talmud, Haggadah 15a is a Talmud tractate, a famous rabbi by the name of Elisha ben Abuya ascends to heaven according to him, sees Metatron sitting on a throne, a privilege reserved only to God. We're taught our Shema and everything else since we're a child. Shema Israel, the Lord our God is one, our Lord is one. So when this rabbi supposedly had a vision quest and saw this Metatron creature sitting beside God, they looked like he was dualistic, right? As two great powers. And then he declares, there are two powers in heaven. This cannot be. Well, the Jewish reaction to prevent this heresy, which sounded too much like Christianity, and rabbis in the Middle Ages said, and even before that, said the books of Enoch, those ideas were borrowed and already present throughout the New Testament, okay? The Talmud describes God ordering Metatron to be struck 60 pulses of fire, punishment, to demonstrate he was merely a servant, not a second God. And Christians would say this all the time. In the Trinity, you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Is Jesus truly God by himself? Or is God truly God by himself? Or is the Spirit of God truly one with God as well? Some people say the three are one, and other people say they're separate and they work in unison in some way. And very few people understand what the Trinity even means because it's confusing. When you say one is three, I mean, simple math, it just sounds confusing. Well, according to the Talmud explanation here, is that this Metatron angelic being who put himself by the equal with the throne of God, well, he was kind of struck down a couple notches. I think Rashi even talked about this angel was so large it had reached up into the clouds and the stars and everything else. I mean, how can you contain an angel that's equal to God and his Shekinah glory? I mean, how can you do that? And you hear about the Logos in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And you read this, it's known as the Logos, does not have a nativity scene of Jesus, but has a more pre-eternal or pre-existent of Jesus and the Father together in the creation of heaven and earth. Does this sound a little bit like Metatron and the portrayal that was you find in the books of Enoch? And this caused so many problems for traditional Orthodox rabbinical thought. But you see that described in the Gospel of John. A man transformed into an angel, but some sort of mutilation there, some sort of mutation there. Consider the Christian sect, Jehovah's Witnesses, that claim that Jesus was an angel and brother of Satan. That's what people in the Watchtower Society, in their books, that's what they believe. And of course, the Latter-day Saints and Mormon Church have their own belief too, that Jesus became the Christ only when he was put on the cross. But he didn't really die on the cross. It just he became this angelic being. Well, a lot of these ideas came from Jewish mysticism, came from the Zohar, came from the Talmud, with the originality from the books of Enoch. Do you see that thread there of explanation? So my presentation today forwarded the argument and the premise that through the books of Enoch became the cornerstone for the personification of Jesus and much of Jewish oral tradition and law today. So if you're a Christian out there and you're offended by what I'm telling you, well, I'm throwing stones at both Jews and Christians here. I want you to be honest. I want you to be upright and truthful. Okay? If you are a rabbi or a dean in religious studies school of Jewish thought, and you teach something to a young developing mind, you should be honest in this and say the originality of this thought came from the books of Enoch. And you can go to this library over here and read these books, but I suggest strongly that it's considered scandalous if you read it in that format. If you read it by Rabbi Akiva, for instance, a Talmud, it's okay to read that. And he asked this elder rabbi over here behind me, he can help you to understand the mysteries of the Zohar in Kabbalah. Okay? Be honest and be truthful. Now, I sincerely hope this presentation was both enjoyable and informative. I did a lot of research on this. I learned a lot, and I wanted to share it with you. I thought this was a fascinating subject. I always like any subject about supernatural things, mysticism, legend, folklore. Behind every fairy tale, that maybe there's a thread of truth. People exaggerate things all the time, and especially Native Americans and all their stories about how things work in nature. It's fascinating. Different cultures throughout time. It's fascinating to understand why they believe in what they believe. Okay? So my job as host of the Torah Watchman show is to do the deep diving so that you will not have to do that, which may be confusing if you cannot put one and two and three and four together. If you cannot put it in pattern analysis and put it together in some sort of common sense framework that's intelligent and astuteful and makes sense, instead of just going off on a tangent. No matter, I would just want to point out that I feel that I am a messenger of God in this. I am a licensed rabbi in Uganda. I care more about being a spokesman of the Lord, and He gives me these ideas. He put the Book of Enoch in my head to talk about tonight. So I do want to share the knowledge of wealth and love and truth to you. And I want it to be a wealth of knowledge. I want it to be a tree of knowledge and an exposition that you can take with you. So if someone tells you something else, or you go to school, or if you're Christian, you talk to a pastor, or Catholic, you talk to a priest, or you're Jew talking to a rabbi, or you're Muslim talking to imam, that even these things that I've talked about tonight can be found in the Quran too. The books of Enoch existed before Islam. Islam did not come in existence until 600 CE. Christianity supposedly came into existence in the year 2000 years ago. Well, it's fascinating to understand how far-reaching it is in our culture. No matter what religion you hold to be true or not at all, you have all these things that were written before that impact the way you think about the world today. Take care. Shalom Aleichem. Ya'ar ben-Emmett, signing out until the next time.
If you enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.